thank you all for coming. I always love being the panel right between the last session and cocktail hour. So we're going to get revved up talking about aerospace and defense and manufacturing and how to make those sectors more resilient, more agile, more revitalized, and then we can have cocktails, right? So no, seriously, this is a very important topic, and I love that Tulip and the team here has incorporated this as a particular focus because it is so topical and yet also so relevant with a number of the people here at this conference can actually affect change and can actually take a step back and look at where our aerospace and defense industries are today and what is actually needed to revitalize them, to change them, to meet the demands of production in these areas. So my name's Dana Grayson, founder of Construct Capital. I've been a venture capitalist for 20 years. I was previously at a firm that I invested in Tulip in one of their early stage rounds and worked closely with the founders here. And so I've seen the growth and transformation of this company and where it is today, which is incredible. At Construct, we invest all across the manufacturing landscape. Aerospace and defense is certainly a focus for us, and we do think it's incredibly important. But I want to talk today to Holly and Beatrice. So, we do know that, America was certainly, U.S. was certainly a leader in aerospace, military, defense sectors. And I think what we've seen over the past few years in particular, with the war in Ukraine and other places, we've just seen demand outstrip supply. And, I think current policies even are trying to look at how we revitalize even past policies. In the past administration, we're looking at how do we revitalize that supply base in light of that new demand. There are especially other challenges in the economy around that supply base. And frankly, what we see from the investment side is just, a lot of the suppliers and the manufacturers that started those companies started them 30, 40 years ago and frankly are retiring. And so you have this lack of supply at the same time you have growing demand. So with that, I think you also have the opportunity to look at the space can become more agile. If there is surging demand, it's always a great time to look at how do we make manufacturing more agile and less rigid. How do we look at the U.S. primes, which I know both of you, but Holly probably works with more closely in D.C., and how do we look at the future of American defense? It's not just about how we build, but it's how fast we can adapt to change. So I'll introduce Beatrice and Holly. Beatrice is at CONNSTEP in Connecticut. Will you tell us a little bit more about CONNSTEP?
Absolutely. So thank you very much. And I'm very happy to be here because this particular area, this segment of the industry is so relevant to our state and to our country. So I'm Beatriz Gutierrez. I'm the president and CEO of CONNSTEP. CONNSTEP is a small organization, 30 employees, that works on providing support from a consulting perspective to small manufacturers in the state of Connecticut. We're part of a network that is funded under the Department of Commerce. So there is one of these entities in each state, plus Puerto Rico, and it's part of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Our role is to help companies with workforce development, supply chain, technology growth, and basically work on any area that will allow us to help the industry, particularly in critical areas of development for the United States. So aerospace, defense, medical devices, et cetera, where we do know that the chain is as strong as the weakest link per se. And our OEMs are committed to great development, but they rely on small manufacturers to get there. So we work with companies under 500 employees. And we are a single point. We basically want to position ourselves as the trusted advisor to small manufacturing.
Perfect. So Holly, at PWC, advising clients in this area.
Absolutely. So I'm based in DC, which gives me a front row seat to, all sorts of shenanigans, I suppose, in the industry. And I think that from a PWC standpoint, we have focused on aerospace and defense because of the honestly, it's a dynamic industry. We've got new entrants. We've got folks that both on the commercial as well as the defense side are trying to figure out how to be relevant as well as how to grow, and in a heavily regulated environment, how to have visibility into the data that's going to be required to succeed. And so having the ability to come alongside our clients and leveraging partnerships like Tulip to really bring the data transparency to the plant floor has been an important element of our focus on a lot of the heavy manufacturing and industrial products, but specifically aerospace and defense, because of some of the concerns and constraints that Dana mentioned of growing demand and a huge backlog from a delivery standpoint.
Yeah. It's always interesting. On the one hand, aerospace and defense sectors are, in some ways, if you look at U.S. progress, it's a good place to experiment. On the other hand, because if it is aerospace and defense related, it needs to be developed on U.S. soil. In other words, so the outsourced manufacturing is not usually an option. And so you can do innovation, you can do advanced things here. There are contracts being granted, of course, to U.S. manufacturers. On the other hand, of course, because it is regulated, so heavily regulated and so important to be regulated, that it can make it harder to adapt to change in these spaces. It's always hard to adapt to change in manufacturing because it's hardware related. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know. But so what are the issues that we can focus on now to actually overcome some of those challenges?
So one thing that I like people to think about, and you bring an excellent point when you're talking about, has to be made in the US. That's true. But the traceability is not as easy as people think. So when you're thinking, for example, about submarines, a lot of the work is done by the OEM and then some levels down. But when you think about aerospace, there's commercial and there's military. There is parts that overlap each other. And after you go from tier 2, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, you may not know where that part is made in a way. And we have seen that as we're working, for example, with ETAR and ER, which is our export compliance part, where we are trying to make maps of supply chains, and we can't. Because one part, one bracket could be made at a 15 people manufacturing down in a little town in Connecticut or in a little town in Indiana. In a Pratt, for example, or a Sikorsky doesn't really know that. So as we're trying to deploy all these standards and get the complete supply chain on board, you're coming down to very small enterprises. And that's why this work is so exciting for us, particularly in the last 2 administrations, where there has been a real focus on really trying to get this work all together and mapped out.
And when I think about what are the problems, right? I think every time I go to an industry, convention, AUSA is coming up next week. We've been talking about these trends of issues in A&D that, quite frankly, I feel like have been the same for the last decade. We got supply chain, we've got workforce, and we've got increased regulation, right? And so I think you talked quite a bit about some of the supply chain things of what people can do now, right? Which is build up the base of those tier 3 and tier 2 suppliers to diversify what that supply base is. But I think the other part from a workforce, and for those of you that have been in the sessions all day today, I think the part that is really interesting and exciting is that the adaptability that technology allows for an industry that is facing increased demand with a decreasing workforce from a skilled labor standpoint. And we talk a lot about the risks of agentic AI and what happens, like how am I going to manage these agents and what about my workforce? Well, kind of help us all if we don't come up with another option for really embedding a master apprentice model that includes agentic, because we are going to run out of master craftsmen to build the next generation of apprentices to fulfill the demand. And so I think from a workforce standpoint, that adaptability of leveraging technology, and companies are doing that now, right? They're digitizing their core. I'm sure that's why all of you are here, right? Is that you are investing in what those digital capabilities are so that you have the flexibility to adapt and address increasing regulation, higher scrutiny of where product and materials are coming from, and a workforce that can be elusive.
And one other thing that I was thinking as you were talking is we are facing 30 years of devaluing manufacturing, so in this country. So that's the reality, correct? So for 30 years we said, don't do manufacturing, it's dirty, it's better to do it in another country. And now we're facing that reality. And we're not gonna birth, per se, enough people to take these jobs. That's just not gonna happen. It's going to be 20 years from now. So technology becomes so relevant in such a good way to bridge that gap, particularly for states, and I'm going to use my state, Connecticut, where the labor force is older. I mean, it's older and we don't have any young people coming in. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but less of that. So we talk a lot at that level of saying, let's go to the schools and educate the teachers, and educate the parents, and but the reality is, even if you do that, and let's say you get 20%, it's not enough still. So technology is the only way we're gonna be able to connect those points.
Do you see, I'd love to hear more about what you see in some of on-the-ground manufacturing, especially in Connecticut, where you work with these companies. Are you seeing advanced technology manufacturing companies be more attractive to new workforce entrants? So is it sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy? If you become more technologically advanced, you also attract better talent?
We have, and I think that's, we can expand nationwide, but in Connecticut, the challenge we have is we have large OEMs. We have 3. So we have Lockheed Martin in the south. We have Pratt & Whitney, Raytheon in the east, and then we have Electric Boat, which is, both submarines. So what we experience is those companies have no problem attracting, because technology is there, a career is there, and also the pay is higher. Where we come into problems is the next levels, because even if they bring a young engineer per se to the other companies, the smaller companies, they get recruited, so they get trained. So that you could make an argument that the smaller companies need to have the innovation faster, because they're just not going to be able to compete in wages.
And have you seen good examples of some of the smaller companies being able to embrace that? Like, how do they? Do they need capital? Do they need subsidies? Do they need reinforcement?
Yes, companies that are usually, I'm thinking about one particular company in the state that does a lot for technology. They make boards, circuit boards. They actually do it both with technology. They embrace technology, particularly. They have brought a lot of, in their case, a lot of robotics, a lot of that, but they also do it with a lifestyle, work lifestyle, which is interesting. So younger kids like the idea that they're closer to the product, that they can create more, and that they have a pretty comfortable workspace. I mean, they had like a beer area. I mean, a lot of things that are more about lifestyle with technology. But yes, in those areas, I think there's a lot of innovation.
And do you feel like sorry, one more question for you, Beatrice.
Yes.
In Connecticut, do you feel like, you mentioned Lockheed, you mentioned the examples, Pratt & Whitney. Do you feel like aerospace and defense are filling some of that void in terms of, the supply base going down, but the demand going up? Is this realistically happening?
I think what we have had is a lot of acquisition. So in Connecticut, in this supply chain, 90% of the companies are privately owned, and many of them are very small. But what we have seen quite successfully is acquisition. A lot of venture capital is coming in and buying 2 or 3 and combining them and getting a lot of opportunities and cost out that way. And I don't see, personally, and that's my opinion, I don't think that's going to change very soon, because that's the only way you can justify that kind of investment. A lot of these companies, I would say, I'll use that term, they're lifestyle enterprises that been in a family for 5 generations, and now the 6th generation, 4th generation doesn't want it.
Right.
So when you have an acquisition, then you're able to bring investment in technologies. And I'll cut it there, but I'll make an example, cybersecurity. We've been talking about CMCC for how many years? And we say, this is the year it comes down, and this is the year it comes down, and it doesn't. Companies, to certify on that, it takes like $100,000 to certify every year. Small company doesn't have that. When you have $3 million of revenues, it's not gonna make any sense. But for a bigger company, it's a necessity to compete.
So it's hard for them to become sort of certified, regulated,
And
kind of
maintain
meet the bar, right?
Exactly. So even with subsidies, because as I mentioned, my organization has received public funding, both federal and state. Even with subsidies, companies just don't see that as a priority compared to other priorities that they have, like recruit people, bring a new machine, a new CNC machine, etc.
And, Holly, I know, in the work that you do, certainly you can't name clients and things like that, but are you seeing similar things of bifurcation by size, the types of companies that are re-architecting themselves to work more in the A&D field, or is it you're working primarily with the usual suspects, the large companies that are just having to reinvent new technological ways of addressing the demand?
So I think the great part of a firm that has historically been known to be in the financial markets and to help on the back office side, I think I have been blessed in having a great view of folks that are trying to enter in. So a lot of the organizations or size of organizations that Beatrice is talking about, as technology becomes, and their products, and the U.S. and Department of Defense tries to treat things more from a commercial standpoint, they're looking for more innovative views of what products and technologies can do. As a result, you're looking at private equity money coming into these organizations to support technological development, and that mix of commercial and defense is really starting to be blurred. And so I think a few other concepts that just in increasing, since the theme here is adaptability, that we've also talked about throughout the course of the day is that interoperability. I mean, if you talk to any of the big primes, interoperability is important because RTX, let's take F-35, for example. Every single big OEM has a part of the F-35. Yep. And yet it's one jet in the air. And so I think similarly to the overall aerospace and defense base, whether you're talking about a commercial aircraft or you're talking about a Javelin missile, like you've got to figure out that composability of what part each of the organizations are going to play, and the technology and the data to be able to feed that overall system is what we're seeing companies be a little bit more aggressive in figuring out how to piece together as an ecosystem, not just a single thread.
So what practical advice can you give, sort of best practices for those operating in the industry, whether your clients or others, obviously, in this room, to adapt more quickly to the aerospace and defense demands?
What actually, someone stole my thunder already this morning, which is, it's about continuous. It's about continuous progress. Continuous transformation was the CX was what was used in the keynote this morning. But what we're seeing a lot of our clients say is this is about progress, not a spot in time transformation, and more and more the appetite to do a 7-year investment that's going to cost $1 billion for heavy tech investment. No one has time for that. Investors don't have time for that. The backlog doesn't have time for that. And so I think building the muscle, the practical advice that we're embedding even in our own approach to implementing digital solutions is, what are those sprint value drops? And that sounds like such a consulting term. I'm so sorry. I'll work on it for a better term later. But what are those specific results that you're going to get measured in weeks, not years? The go lives need to be measured in 6-8 week increments, not in 1 15-month, 2-year large implementations. So I think that building the muscle for continuous evolution is what I think our practical advice has been, and what we're seeing companies really embrace out of necessity, because the technology is advancing so fast. They're already out of date by the time you go live with something.
I will add to that we very similar advice for our small companies. I'm thinking of a particular company in Connecticut, Hapco, where the CEO told me, he said, I wanted to do digital innovation, and then when we brought that specialist, he said, are you using your ERP system? Have you gotten the most out of that system? And it's something that we don't think about. We have it in, we use it and he said, just start with that. And he said for him, taking that small step and really understanding the ERP system. So he said, I send someone to training, I have them really become the expert in-house for this. And once we had that little win, then people got empowered to say, let's take the next step. Because part of the challenge is just too much information, particularly for small companies. They're looking and saying, oh my God, AI. And, I have to look at my ERP. I don't have people. I have this. And it's, so much coming their way. So just break the problem in small pieces and take one area in your operation and automate that. Just a piece, one process, one step of the process, and continue. And this is a company that has now brought up, they're doing their work instructions with AI now. But they started little. Because where we have a lot of bad experiences is, yep, here, we're going to build this for you, put $3 million in, and you put it in, and now it's sitting there like my gym, any machine I have to hand close on it because I don't use them. So you just have to start small and get wins and celebrate with the team. And that's one thing we say to people, get one metric, measure that, and celebrate. And let the whole culture in your company understand that was a win. And that way you can get some buy-in into it, because these changes are not only technical, they're cultural. And that's one piece that sometimes organizations forget. It's not just the technology is the easiest piece. The cultural change, the change management is actually, from our experience, more important, more significant than the technology itself.
If I could add one more thing that just came from a practical standpoint, for those of you that are in aerospace and defense, especially on the defense side, the other thing is, don't hide behind the fact that we're a regulated industry as an excuse to not make progress. There are lots of regulated industries that are moving faster. And just like the end product that served the mission of the organization is moving fast and we are being innovative, I would comment that giving that same level of aggressiveness and posture is important on the manufacturing floor just the same.
Yeah, because the requirements are changing. In addition to the surge in demand happening, you mentioned sort of just the need for the word, I guess, is like attributable systems that are just, cheaper to make, but also okay to lose. Is kind of like the way I describe that. Like you want more high volume of these things, lower cost, and you need sort of a new and better way to develop these products. So we see a number of companies at Construct that literally their thesis is, we came out of SpaceX, we know how to, agilely develop hardware and attributable systems for aerospace and defense, and that's our secret sauce. And it kind of took us 2 or 3 of these companies to be like, is that sustainable? And it turns out like, if you get a 2 to 3 year lead time on some of the more laborious, suppliers that have entrenched contracts maybe with primes, you can do it on your own and vertically integrate faster. And you need all the systems and the technology to support that, but you also need a mindset and a culture and demand from an industry that wants these products now. And you do have that. Like, how many companies, how many startups do we struggle with in my line of work that have everything but demand? You're like, your technology's great, you have no market. And this is absolutely not the case in the aerospace and defense market right now.
And you have a great point, though, and you do too, on the regulation part. Yes, there is regulation, but not every single part is under that. So it's something that, like you said, people hide under. I know in Connecticut a cabinet maker that makes part, one of their brackets goes into the F-135. And it's a bracket for a kitchen cabinets. So you cannot say that part is regulated. No, it's not. In this particular company that I'm speaking about, they actually were given an innovation award maybe 5 years ago under the other Trump administration because they brought their supply chain from China and they are making their cabinets in the US. And they're competing with China and Malaysia where they used to have the products. It was a family owned. The father said, I want my stuff to be made in the US because the incentives in Asia were changing, and he brought his supply chains. So if you take cabinet making for kitchens, and you can do that, and they participate in aerospace. Mm-hmm. So Kerry Manufacturing in Cromwell, Connecticut. So it is, I think, like you said, there is a lot of myths. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I would say is very important right now is we have an aligned client, which is the federal government. And that had not happened so directly. During this administration, it's being clear that this administration has identified the change in this particular, bringing technology into this space as a critical lever for them. So it's kind of similar to when we said, you will be in the moon in the next 10 years. And all these funders, like Department of Defense, Department of Energy, have been giving direction to focus on bringing both private and technology into this space. So if there's a moment to really get this transformation, it's right now.
I'll pause for a second. We have a few minutes left, of course, but are there questions or topics from the audience that we want to hear more about related to aerospace and defense? Any questions? Otherwise, we can keep going. Okay. Related to some of the things that you see, Holly, with some of your clients and kind of, how are they adjusting to changes in demand and sort of the pressures that they have on them, and what practical advice on that side of it do you give them?
I think for the large primes, there's a lot of investment. I mean, there's some notable ones, right? I mean, Lockheed's $7 billion one LMX, that's 7 years long. L3Harris has commented on their investment from a underlying infrastructure standpoint. All of them comment on model-based enterprises to be able to create kind of standard processes and operations. And so I think the theory is if we're able to get down to a digital core that is common, it will allow us to then be able to adapt on the fringes and on the edges. And so I think what we're seeing is a decent amount of delayed investment, quite frankly, in reinvesting in the core, because it's been deferred for 4 decades. And what's interesting is that it's coming at a time where there's a lot of more agile entrants. All of the ones that Beatrice has talked about, many of you probably in the room, right? Where there are parts of the defense industrial base that are able to move faster. SpaceX obviously is the most, the one that gets all the press of their ability to move and be a little bit more aggressive because of their financing, because of the way their capital structure. But I think everyone's now trying to get themselves in a position to be in that same posture. And they're trying to figure out a way to do it without losing the contracts that they have, right? And so that balance is what I think why people are investing in tools that give visibility to the underlying elements of their manufacturing base, of their supply chain, of where things are coming from. So a lot of the examples that we've seen throughout the day today that the technology solutions are able to provide on the manufacturing floor give that composability to figure out how to bifurcate that and give them more options.
One area that when we're talking about where you can see a lot of innovation today, we were talking when we were preparing for our conversation, and I'd love you to expand a little bit on that, is the IP piece. So you mentioned that, and I think that's realistic because we did a program sponsored by the Department of Defense with the 3 OEMs and 10 suppliers on each of them, where we were trying to get some learnings around model-based definition. And it was interesting to us that even if you could think they're not directly competing, there was a very, there was great difficulty, even if this was played by the Department of Defense, both between the OEMs and their suppliers to share the learnings. So for us, that was clear. I mean, it was funded, we did it for 2 years, and even to share them with us. We were supposed to be managing this, and it's like, yeah, we learned a lot. What? And so you mentioned that, and I think we should expand on that because that's a real roadblock to a lot of these technologies.
I sat in the AI session a couple hours ago, and a gentleman from Oshkosh asked the question, like, how do we, and there was a gentleman from NVIDIA on the panel, and the question was, how do we monitor all of these great agents that are going to learn? I think his comment was that he had AI agents that knew him better than his wife as to what his preferences were and all of that, which that's a side question for that gentleman later. But I do think that like the question was a good one related to intellectual property though, right? Which is, okay, how do you create a governance muscle that treats the technology and the data that you are collecting and the technology that you are leveraging, including AI, and the interoperability to your full supply value chain, your frenemies or your competimates or whatever benign term you want to call them, right? In a world of interoperability, how do you protect your IP? And what is your governance around how you protect your data while also helping it, especially in the world of AI, helping it learn properly so that you are able to continue to evolve your product. And it is wildly oversimplified, but I do think that we as an overall community, and especially this industry, we've got to figure out what that governance is, just like we had to figure it out when it was just a bunch of human beings that you had to protect, right? Because it used to be inside all of our brains. And that's how we got clearances, and that's how we protected our intellectual property. And of now applying that to the digital realm, I think it's on all of us to figure out what that governance model is going to be.
And I think it becomes even more relevant when we're thinking about cybersecurity, correct? So we can talk about all these AI and all this digital transformation, but the way we talk out to our customers said, but you have to have cybersecurity tools and infrastructure around that. And we know ChatGPT. Yes, I'm going to Italy, make me a trip, and the next thing is I get some offer of Italian food or something. So we know our data is out there. So when we come to these particular industries, how do we make sure we can leverage the benefits of the technology in a way that doesn't expose not only the companies, the country? Because remember, we're talking about defense, and our let's call it competitors may be countries that are not aligned with the U.S. policies or enemies per se. So very simple, China. I mean, let's simplify it. So you have a country that is moving faster than we are, extremely faster on their technology, but they do have structures of control, political structure of control that we don't. So it is a risk, and it's something we really need to really think about from your standpoint, governance. One thing that I did wanted to say on a positive side, when I said that I have two sides to it, is we have very interesting programs coming out right now. For example, in the shipbuilding, submarines, the Columbia class. So the Virginia class, we talked a little bit earlier about how these programs are so long that sometimes that's why this industry doesn't adapt as fast as we want it to, because we're talking about the FDA being 10 years, and some of these programs are 20, 30 years. They're measuring decades. But the Columbia class, which is coming out now after the Virginia class, is an opportunity, and they are doing a lot of very, very interesting things on the way they're bringing technology into it. And it is one opportunity for companies, if they're here, to really align themselves around that, because the whole way they're building it is very different. Mm-hmm. It is very integrated. They're building all in one place and sending it out. They're bringing pieces of technology, very modular per se, different to what they did before with the Virginia class. So yes, some of these programs take too long and you cannot bring innovation, but there's a lot of other areas where you can, plug yourself in and try these things. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of commitment to it.
Yeah. The pro and the con of the space is that, once you get the contracts, they're very sticky. They last forever, but it makes it also difficult to shift and get recertified within it. Any other questions? We have just a couple minutes left. Any questions from the audience? Any comments around aerospace and defense? How many of you work in serving the aerospace and defense industries today? I assume most everyone in the market, in the room. Do these topics, or the comments up here, jive with what you guys see on the ground and what you're hearing in terms of both pressure on demand and also constraints on the supply? Show of hands, yes, no. Okay, great. Any questions, comments? No?
So you started talking about workforce, and we're going to have a much more transient workforce, so I get it. But being a welder at EB is a tough career.
Oh, yes.
How do you contrast that with Anduril, Regent, all these, even ASML is in the neighborhood, cool companies. So how do you bring technology in that's going to support that transient workforce, that's going to make it cool?
And you're totally right. Our experience has been that even with the incentives Electric Boat is putting out there to hire 5,000 employees a year, they can't. Because these kids come in, they train, and they're like, I'm out of here. They don't last. So part of it is, I think, early on, is not in the salary, it's on understanding, giving them an opportunity to understand the technology earlier. I think that's very important. But most importantly, I hate to say it, and in defense that's difficult, we need to recruit outside. For example, in the state of Connecticut, Electric Boat tries that, and they are looking at other industries that may be similar, where you can bring someone and elevate their skills. But it's a tough environment, and I think it's also cultural. We don't see it as a job you want to do. period. So it's a challenge. It's a big challenge.
It does seem to be the world, solving world hunger level conundrum, right? That we've been grappling with probably for at least a decade, because I think we've seen this cliff coming, and for a while, and I don't know that we envisioned the cliff of the skilled workforce dropping at the same time as the unprecedented levels of backlog and demand,
But
right?
COVID
That was
accelerated that too.
It did, but so did wars on multiple fronts, et cetera. And therefore, I think it's going to take a multifaceted answer. Absolutely, everything Beatrice said, that we're going to have to do that. The other thing is, I think we have the benefit of technology to figure out other solutions also. One that we talked about this morning. Imagine a world where our master craftsman is sitting and we're able to, through the kind of video capture, then automatically create new SOPs that can be corrective in real time. And so you need a master craftsman for 9 shop floors versus 18 master craftsmen to apprentice 9 different factory floors, right? Because you have more agile and real-time generative and corrective technology to help train a transient and churning workforce versus thinking that you're going to have someone for 40 years, right? I think while we need to try and make a workforce that's a little stickier from a manufacturing standpoint, I think we also need to realize we may no longer be in a world where people are going to stay at the same company for 40 years, right? And so how do we use technology to our advantage? But I think it's going to take all of those aspects to solve that problem.
If I may, one thing that we actually Electric Boat has talked about, and this is obviously needs changes at the Department of Defense. There are populations that could be available to work in these areas, underserved populations, females, but also people with record, with criminal record. And some offenses are really, you stole a pack of cigarettes somewhere in your life when you were 16, and now you're banned from working on a defense contract for the rest of your life. So there are attempts to, in Electric Boat and others are trying to talk about, I had the opportunity to go to the White House to a panel discussion on workforce, and one of the things that they were told, this is during the Biden administration, they were trying to do is to look at the labor requirements and how certain offenses may not be detrimental forever. Because that's a challenge. There are people that could work and could be trained to work and need jobs, but there is definitely a very high barrier to entry into the defense area. Particularly as you have a lot of young people that could be local. A lot of people are not living in Connecticut, and they're working on retail, which pays much less. So that's an area that is being looked at, I know at a state level, at a federal level, to find the people. So.
Great.
That's a great question, though.
No more questions, I think. Any other questions, topics? I think we're just about out of time. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see so many people here working in aerospace and defense.